We are very excited to have TJ with us here today. And now I'm going to turn it over to TJ to present.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Timothy Gordon Jr., also known as TJ. In today's webinar, I will be talking about coping with loss during COVID-19 and societal conflicts. So before I get into the webinar, I will make a brief introduction of myself. Again, my name is Timotheus Gordon Jr., or TJ for short. My pronoun, he, his. And on the picture, I am wearing a blue shirt, a black mask that is around my neck. I have a pair of glasses on, a afro, and I am a cis male that has medium to dark complexion. I am a co-founder of Chicagoland Disabled People of Color Coalition, as well as the research assistant for the Institute on Disability and Human Development here at IC. And for those who don't know about Chicagoland DPOC, we are a group of people with disabilities who are also people of color in the Chicagoland area, mainly in the city, but we also cover the suburbs as well. But we are a group that promotes disability acceptance and inclusion in communities of color throughout Chicago. Because of the subject matter, I would like to give brief content warning. I may make references to death, suicide, and grief a lot throughout the webinar. So I understand that I will bring up a lot of heavy things. So if you need to take a break, or if you don't want to go further on with the webinar, I respect your decision and I understand. But I just wanted to let you all know before I go further. I may use person with autism and autistic person interchangeably. I identify with both the person first language, which would be person with autism, with identity first language, which is autistic person. All right, so this year has been one kind of year. It's been a huge year filled with a lot of events that are emotional and downright dark. We started off with lots of losses, huge losses in the celebrity world, and that includes the Hall of Fame basketball player Kobe Bryant, his daughter Gianna, and a few other people who died in a plane crash in California. That was in January. We also continue to deal with the COVID-19 or the coronavirus pandemic that is affecting the whole world, not just the United States. We have experienced protests and media coverage due to the social and racial unrest in the United States, because we continue to see police violence towards people of color. We have a presidential election that's coming up in a few weeks, actually. And let's just say, I don't get into it further because it's already controversial as it is. But let's just say a lot is riding on the presidential election this year. We also have lost some historical figures like the Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Representative John Lewis. But in addition to what's been going on worldwide and nationwide, there's also been a lot of personal losses as a result of COVID-19 and the social racial atmosphere in the United States, whether it's going through death, unemployment, your interest has been halted or ended because of what's going on in the world, and many more. So to put it into a perspective, especially in a perspective in an autistic person, let's take a look at an example of what I've experienced as an autistic person this year. For starters, as I mentioned before, we lost a lot of celebrities this year. And some of the celebrities and heroes I followed immensely, like Kobe Bryant, Gale Sayers, which he was a Hall of Fame running back for the Chicago Bears, but he was also instrumental in a book called I Am Third, in which part of the book he talked about his relationship with his white teammate, Mike Piccolo, and that part eventually turned into a movie called Brian's Song. So that was a huge loss that I experienced. And also, I found out around the same time frame that the actor that played Black Panther, my favorite hero, passed away also. And that actor is Chadwick Boseman. I also dealt with the death with a friend in the disability advocacy community, as well as my godfather. Now, those two instances are not COVID related, but they still happen within the same time frame. And I had to make huge adjustments due to COVID-19. Now, for those who know me personally, I love talking about sports. I love watching sports. I love to participate in sports. But because of COVID-19, a lot of sporting events had to be postponed until late summer and now, which is the fall season. So I couldn't watch sports for a while. Places that I want to go to, I couldn't go anymore because of the pandemic, and partly also because of the social unrest. Now, I also like to go to anime and comic conventions, especially in the Chicago area. That went out the window. And I changed the way that I like to have fun, because I have to make sure that I do things within the guidelines for handling the pandemic. So no big parties. I can't go to crowded places as much to avoid getting sick. it's just been lots of things going on, to say the least. All right, I'll go to the next slide. All right, so with that being said about the losses that we experienced this year and handling loss in general, as well as my story about what I went through in 2020 in a nutshell, I will spend a few moments with on talking about understanding and handling grief and loss as an autistic person. Now, you may hear two myths about people with autism when it comes to processing grief and loss. One myth is that people with autism do not have emotions whatsoever. Therefore, they do not know how to grieve or are incapable of grieving. Excuse me for a moment. Sorry about that. And also, the second myth is people with autism do not understand figures of speech, idioms, or metaphors, especially any metaphor or imagery related to death or loss. For instance, you may hear people say, sorry for your loss. This person has transitioned. This person passed away. This person was the angels, and many more imageries. However, people like myself on the autism spectrum do understand metaphors, and we do have emotional responses to grief, death, and loss. But just like any human experience, regardless of what disability you have or whatnot, we have spectrums of how we deal with death, grief, and loss. It's how we understand, process, and show despair that differs from neurotypical people or people who do not have autism or a developmental or intellectual disability. But I would also like to note that there's even a spectrum of emotional expressions within the autistic community too. So I may feel a certain way about a loss. Another person with autism may experience something different. And to add a statistic on how grief and loss could affect the autism community, I'd like to give this quick statistic. People with autism are 9 times more likely to commit suicide based on a source from a autism group in the UK. People with autism are 9 times more likely to commit suicide. So in other words, without support or intervention after the loss, you all might not see us again. We are more likely to die because of suicide, which scares me personally. Next slide. So you may ask in the audience, why do we grieve? Why do autistic people grieve? And as stated before, we may grieve differently or we may grieve because of something that another person may not grieve about. So one thing we grieve about is a loss of a person, a favorite pet, or also the end of certain programs, shows, and things that we like due to any sudden changes. We also grieve, especially in these times, because of sudden changes to our routine, things that we normally are used to doing in a time frame have suddenly been changed. And it's difficult for some of us to cope with the changes. Some of us grieve because we don't understand what's going on or why the events from this year are happening. Some may feel the pressure from people around us to be strong, hide your feelings, to move on. But at some point, some may need more than motivation. They may need somebody to talk to, but because they are encouraged to hide their feelings, they may not handle the pressure as much. Because of what's going on with the police violence and also the protest, this may be increased fears, such as fear of being attacked because of your disability, because of your sexuality or sexual orientation, because of your gender, or because of your race. And that also includes facing further oppression and bullying because you're in a minority group or in a oppressed group. Another reason why we may grieve is that people may not understand what we go through. We may not understand what we talk about. And it's not just happening this year, but also it happens a lot to some people in the autism spectrum where they may isolate themselves because they are constantly being looked over, misunderstood, ignored, or lied to, things of that nature. All right, so the next thing is how do we deal with loss or pain and much more? Especially if you're a person on the autism spectrum, we may shut down. We may not communicate with anyone, not talk about it at all. Or we may talk about our grief a lot to our loved ones to the point where it raises concern. Some of us would not feel anything. Others may feel extreme emotions, extreme sadness, extreme joy, extreme anger, especially when the loss affects something or someone we care about. Some of us may dive into routines and interests that we still have. So, for instance, let's say if you're dealing with the protest in downtown Chicago, for instance, and you keep seeing that over and over again, to get away from it all, you may go deeper into watching your favorite anime or go deeper into learning about history just to escape. Some of us may fall into addictions, whether it's food and drink addiction, drugs, alcohol, sex, and maybe more addictions. Or some people will deal with it by harming themselves, harming other people and things, or killing somebody or themselves as a result of the pain. All right, so yes, we pretty much covered already why do we grieve and how do we deal with loss. Oh yes, in addiction, I forgot to mention that some people, when they go through a loss or grief, they literally feel sick to their stomach. They feel ill. They get headaches. They want to nauseate because of the severity of what's going on. The overload of what's going on is it's a lot going on at once to the point where they can't handle it physically. But on a positive note, we can talk more about how can you help autistic people deal with loss and grief, and I know there's people out there who has a loved one with autism and they're going through a hard time right now, and you wonder how can I help this person through this time? And I actually have a few pointers based on what I experienced personally or what I've heard from people in the autistic community. Excuse me a moment. All right, I'm back. Sorry. All right, so give the person time and space to heal. Do not overwhelm the person. Some of us on the spectrum need more time to heal and process things, and we need more time to be left alone. So it's best not to overwhelm us with questions or trying to surround us with people at that moment. But time by time, you can still have somebody that we trust to check up on us to see if it is okay. That is fine. But just don't overwhelm us with the help right there and there, because that could make the situation worse for the autistic person going through grief and loss. Also, another suggestion is to listen to the person. Don't try to lecture too much. Just listen to them and support the person in need. At the end of the day, the person may need somebody to talk to and just want to be heard at the moment. Now, if you want to give advice where it's needed at that moment, then so be it. But it's best not to question, like right then and there. Let's say if you have an activity that's been canceled or postponed because of COVID-19 or the events taking place in the world, most would tell the person to get over it. It's okay. It's coming back. But some of us on the spectrum don't want to hear it. That's just from personal experience. So in that case, you could give the person alternatives to activities that have been suspended or canceled that are close to the things that they're enjoying. So, for instance, basketball was postponed for a few months, so I wasn't able to watch NBA basketball for a while. However, there are documentaries and movies about basketball that I can get into. There are video games that I can get into, or I can even play basketball by myself or with a couple of people outside, as long as, of course, you do it safely within COVID-19 guidelines, of course, in your city or county or wherever you live. Also encourage the person to enjoy the things and interests that they love and that they still have as well. As far as dealing with death, explain a loss or grief to the person in a way that makes sense to that particular person, and try to avoid using religious reference or popular metaphors if the person cannot understand those references. So, in other words, it would be best if you just tell the person what's going on as detailed and plain language as possible. Otherwise, they may not understand some of the references, or some autistic people may not care for some of the religious references for litany of reasons. Encourage the person to channel their grief into something positive they enjoy. For instance, let's say if an autistic person is overwhelmed by the incidence of police violence and they are angry about it, you can encourage the person to use their talents to channel that grief into something productive. They could write, they could blog, they could create art, they could join advocacy projects. They could do many things to channel whatever grief they have into something positive and productive. Now, let's say you've done everything that you could, you suggest everything that you could, but nothing is working. It is okay. You may support the person from afar, even if they don't want your help. It's not you at the end of the day. They just need time and space to deal, or they may call upon you on a later time. And a couple of ways you can do that. You can have people to check on the person, whether it's a friend, a family member, or a co-worker, somebody that they trust. Or you can also send messages of support, or you can send them fun things that can make a person's day. So send them a meme that's funny to the person, or send them some money for coffee or other things. All right, so I do have a few resources that you all can look into later on. There's one on understanding death and illness and what they teach about life, which deal towards people with autism and their loved ones. And that resource could help people explain grief and loss in a way that people with autism could understand without decoding metaphors. And there's also example of autistic people as well talking about how they deal with loss. And I posted two YouTube links on Temple Grandin, the famous autistic advocate, where she basically explains how she sees death and how she processes grief in her own way. And there's also some more resources for autism and loss for you to check out later if you have time. And I leave you all with one additional resource. Just ask an autistic person or a person with autism, for they are the experts in dealing with loss in their own way. Now, there are plenty of autistic people with various stories on how they handle grief or death. So it's a lot, and it may vary, but it's best to ask a autistic person or check out their social media and website content if you'd like to get a first-hand experience. And that is all that I have. Thank you all for attending this part of the webinar series. And I apologize if I was going in and out because of my voice.
Thank you so much, TJ. This was great information. We do have a few questions. We have a question: how can folks support people on the spectrum who are grieving?
That's a great question. It depends on the autistic person, how you approach that person. I would definitely say if the person needs space and more time, just give them more time. But you can also let them know that I'm here for you. Whatever you need, just let them know. Just reassure the person that you're here for them. But if they don't want help, that's also understandable. It's not your fault, because I believe otherwise that if you overwhelm a autistic person in grief with people, information, commands, and lots of words at one time, then they may shut down even further or react to the situation. So in short, I believe that it's best to start out with supporting them from afar. And if they come to you, then you could help them directly.
Thank you. We have another question that says, there's a comment: thank you for a great presentation. What might be some signs that the person with autism is struggling with grief?
Hey, Shantae. I appreciate it. And to reiterate your question, you asked, what might be some signs that the person with autism is struggling with grief? That's a good question, and it varies from person to person, just like with anything else. But I can give you a few examples. For instance, if a person writes cryptic message on social media explaining their grief or hinting that they want to do something about it through harm or self-harm, that could be a sign. Or another sign could be they refuse to eat, they refuse to do the things that they usually enjoy, they shy away from people further, or, or they might have stronger emotions, which comes out as anger or other manifestations of feelings, if that makes sense.
Thank you for providing that. Could you give an example of, it says, a loved one with autism, and how to communicate with that person without relying on a lot of jargon?
So, but let's say if an autistic person is dealing with somebody who passed away, like a parent or a grandparent, if I was the parent, or if I was the family member, rather, or guardian, I would explain to the person that the person died. If they would like to know what happened, you can provide that information, or you can provide the person also with funeral arrangements or how they prepare the body, or also you can provide them with concrete ways of remembering that person. So saving their pictures or recount the fun memories that they have with the person who died, or keeping things that remind them of that person. I think those kinds of things could help a person understand grief and loss without getting deep into jargon. Excuse me.
Okay, thank you. Yes, that made sense. We had a comment, and then we have another question. What is an effective way to engage a person with autism who has shut down following a loss?
That's a good question. That may vary from person to person. I think all the situations may vary from person to person. It depends on how the autistic person react to a situation, or even how a person with autism could shut down. With that being said, let's say if a autistic person shuts down due to a loss or grief, you can ask the person if they're okay. If they come to you, that's great. If they don't want to come to you during a shut down, you can always reassure that you always reassure them by saying something to the effect of, if you need anything, come to me. I'm here for you. I'll give you time. Or if you want to talk to other people, you may do so. And some people who may shut down in a situation, they may already let somebody know ahead of time. So let's say if I'm in a shutdown, I'll let anybody else know but a trusted friend. What a parent could do is, instead of going through the person directly, you could refer to the trusted person to see how things are going.
Great, thank you for answering that. The next question we have is, if we are concerned about that someone is turning to unhealthy coping skills like drinking or drugs, how can we help them in this time of social distancing?
How can we help someone who's fallen deep into addiction because of grief and loss during the pandemic? That is a great question. I could come back. I will look into it further and come back to you with a more detailed answer. But I will say from personal experience that let's say if the grief goes to the level of addiction, then you could still check up on them to see if everything is okay. It may be the issue of giving that person the space to vent about what's going on, what's bothering them, and then you can offer either programs that could help ease the addiction or pain, or offer them activities that could give it that could replace the addiction with something what's the better word than acceptable or more fulfilling. But I'll definitely come back to you and let you know about ways to help the person cope with addiction due to what's going on in the world in the pandemic. I'll definitely look into it.
Thank you. We did have another question. In this time of social distancing and sheltering at home, can we use Zoom, Skype, or text to connect with someone?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would encourage you all to use Zoom, FaceTime, Facebook Messenger, text, whatever form of communication that you all use to communicate with the loved ones. Feel free to use it. And another thing I would suggest is use the communication form that the person with autism prefers. So if that person prefers texting, communicate through text. Or if person would like to be FaceTime or get a phone call, communicate with them that way. But absolutely, any form of communication is encouraged.
Great. We have a question for you, and it's, how have you dealt with things that went on around you this year or in general when it comes to loss?
That's a lot. That's a lot, but that's a good question. I won't get into it in depth because it's been a lot that happened in my life, personally and professionally, in just 1 year. But I have coped with some of the things going around me by one, I've been starting playing more retro video games on my computer, like Sonic or NHL '94. I've also connected with friends as well through Zoom or through very, very small get-togethers where we just watch a movie or play video games and just talk and have a good time. I've also been making face masks to cope with loss, but to also to expand my mind as well. And I also dug deeper into helping people with disability through my advocacy during that time. So I think I have many different coping mechanisms that I use to deal with the world around me without relying on unhealthy things to get through the pain and the stress.
Thank you for sharing those. One of the last questions we have is, what do you recommend as alternative supports for people who don't use verbal language to process loss and grief?
I'm more of a verbal person, so that's something I could definitely come back to you to give you a more accurate answer. I might go to a person who uses another form of language to communicate. However, I would say just like I think with in the previous question, if you want to use Zoom or other forms of communication that's out there to communicate with that person, you may do so. But as long as you're using the person's preferred communication, with a person that uses other means of expressing themselves, let's say if a person uses a computer or phone through typing to express themselves, if they use sign language, or if they have their own way of expressing themselves that you could understand to a certain level, I personally believe that using their communication methods will be the best way to connect with that person rather than trying to talk.
Okay, thank you for answering that. One of the other questions we got was, you recommended giving people time to heal and to answer questions. How long should we wait? Should we give them a day, week, 2 weeks?
How long it takes, but as long as you get some idea of what's going on and what can you do to help in the meantime. I think that's the most important thing from a support aspect. If the person needs a day, so be it. If they need 6 months, so be it as well. It depends on the person going through grief. But in their own way, they'll let you know when they're ready to come to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, TJ. It looks like that's all of the questions that we have. We have a bunch of thank yous from the attendees as well. Thank you for this wonderful presentation. For everyone, please join us for our next webinar, which is on Wednesday, November 11th from 12 to 1, titled Welcome to the Autistic Community. Thank you so much, TJ.
And I'll thank you all for this opportunity.